The rain hammered against the cedar shingles like 1,000 angry fists, each drop adding to the symphony of the storm that had descended upon the Montana territory. Thomas Brennan stood at his cabin window, watching lightning split the black sky above his ranch. At 35, he'd grown accustomed to these violent autumn storms, just as he'd grown accustomed to the solitude that wrapped around him like a well-worn coat. His spread wasn't large by territorial standards, 600 acres of grassland nestled between two ridges, with a creek running through the southern portion. The main house, built from logs he'd cut and notched himself, sat on a small rise overlooking the valley. To the east stood his barn, sturdy and weathered, sheltering his 4 horses and milk cow from nature's fury. Thomas had lived alone for 3 years now, ever since Mary had succumbed to the fever. The quiet didn't bother him anymore. He had his routines: morning coffee before dawn, tending to the animals, mending fences, breaking horses for the occasional buyer from town. Evenings found him by the fire with a book or his father's old fiddle, though he played less these days. The melodies reminded him too much of dancing with Mary in this very room. Thunder cracked overhead, so close the windows rattled in their frames. Thomas was about to turn away when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. He paused, tilting his head. There it was again, coming from the direction of the barn. Not the restless movement of horses or the lowing of his cow, but something else. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He pulled on his oilskin coat and grabbed the lantern from its hook by the door. His Winchester stood in the corner, and after a moment's hesitation, he took it too. Probably just a coyote seeking shelter, he told himself, but a man couldn't be too careful. Not out here, where the nearest neighbor was 8 miles away and the law might as well be on the moon. The wind nearly tore the door from his hand as he stepped into the storm. Rain slashed at his face, cold and sharp. He hunched his shoulders and made for the barn, boots squelching in the mud. The lantern swung wildly, casting dancing shadows that made every sagebush look like a crouching figure. Inside the barn, his horses nickered nervously. Dusty, his big bay gelding, stamped and snorted. The animals were spooked, no doubt about it. Thomas hung the lantern on a nail and stood still, listening. The storm's roar was muffled here, and in the relative quiet, he heard it clearly, a soft whimper like a child crying. "Who's there?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "This is private property." No answer, just another whimper from the far corner, behind the stacked hay bales. Thomas cocked his rifle, the metallic click loud in the barn's confines. Slowly, he made his way toward the sound, every sense alert. What he saw when he rounded the hay bales made him lower his weapon in shock. A woman huddled in the corner, pressed against the rough wooden walls as if trying to disappear into them. She clutched 3 children to her, 2 boys who looked to be maybe 6 and 8, and a girl who couldn't have been more than 4. But it was the woman's state that made Thomas's breath catch. She wore nothing but a torn chemise that barely covered her, the thin fabric clinging to her rain-soaked skin. Her feet were bare and bloodied, her dark hair hanging in wet strings around a face marked by exhaustion and terror. The children were hardly better off, dressed in threadbare nightclothes that offered no protection against the cold. They clung to their mother like barnacles to a rock, their eyes wide with fear as they stared at Thomas and his rifle. "Sweet Jesus," Thomas breathed. He immediately set the rifle aside and held up his hands. "I'm not going to hurt you, ma'am. You're safe here." The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out. She was shivering so violently her teeth chattered. The littlest one, the girl, had her face buried in her mother's shoulder, her small body racked with sobs. Thomas shrugged out of his oilskin coat and approached slowly. the way he would a spooked horse. "Here," he said softly. "Take this. You must be freezing." The woman flinched when he got close, pressing harder against the wall. Her eyes, green as summer grass, darted between his face and the coat he held out. "Please," Thomas said. "I've got a warm house, food, blankets. Let me help you." "No." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Go can't. He'll find us." "Who'll find you?" Thomas asked, though he was already draping the coat around her shoulders. This close, he could see bruises on her arms, purple and yellow marks that told their own story. She didn't answer, just pulled the coat tighter with trembling hands. Thomas made a decision. Storm or no storm, these folks couldn't stay in his barn. "I'm Thomas Brennan," he said. "This is my ranch. Nobody's going to hurt you here. I give you my word. But you need to get warm and dry, especially these young ones." He looked at the children, trying to soften his weather-beaten features into something less frightening. "You hungry? I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread from yesterday." The older boy lifted his head slightly at the mention of food. Thomas could see the hunger in his eyes. Probably in all their eyes. "We can't," the woman said again, but weaker this time. "It's not safe. For you, he'll—" "Ma'am," Thomas interrupted gently. "Whoever he is, he's not here now, and you'll catch your death staying in this barn. These children need warmth and food." He stood and took a step back, giving her space. "I'm going to my house. The door will be open. You come when you're ready. If you don't, I'll bring blankets and food out here, but I'd rather see you all properly sheltered." He picked up his rifle and the lantern, then paused at the barn door. The woman hadn't moved, but he saw something flicker in her eyes, maybe hope, maybe just desperation. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly he almost missed it over the storm. "Catherine. Catherine Mills. Well, Mrs. Mills, my home is your home for as long as you need it." With that, he pushed back out into the storm. Inside his cabin, Thomas built up the fire until it roared, then put water on to heat. He pulled out every spare blanket he owned, laid them near the hearth, and ladled stew into bowls. He was cutting thick slices of bread when he heard the door open. Catherine stood there, his coat draped over her shoulders, the 3 children clustered around her legs. In the lamplight, he could see them all more clearly. The boys had their mother's dark hair and delicate features. The little girl was fairer, with corn-silk hair and blue eyes. All 4 were soaked through and shaking. "Come in," Thomas said, keeping his voice gentle. "Come stand by the fire." They moved as one unit, Catherine herding the children toward the warmth. Thomas noticed how she positioned herself between him and the children, how her eyes tracked his every movement. "I'll get some dry clothes," he said. "They'll be too big, but better than what you've got." He went to his bedroom and pulled out whatever might work, an old shirt of Mary's he'd kept, some of his smaller shirts, wool socks. When he returned, he found them exactly where he'd left them, standing before the fire like statues. "Here," he set the clothes on a chair. "There's a room through there where you can change. I'll turn my back, give you privacy." "Why?" Catherine asked suddenly. "Why are you helping us?" Thomas considered the question. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "Because I'd want someone to help me if I was in trouble. Because—" he gestured toward the children. "Because they're young ones, and they're cold and scared, and that's reason enough." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes but didn't fall. She nodded once, then gathered the clothes and shepherded the children into the other room. While they changed, Thomas busied himself warming the stew and setting out bowls. He heard whispers from the other room, Catherine's voice soothing and gentle despite everything. When they emerged, she wore Mary's old blue dress. It hung loose on her thinner frame, but it was clean and dry. The boys wore his shirts like nightgowns, and he'd wrapped the little girl in one of his union suits, rolling up the sleeves and legs until just her hands and feet peeked out. "Sit," Thomas said, indicating the table. "Eat." They fell on the food like wolves, though Catherine tried to maintain some decorum. The children's names, he learned between bites, were James, Robert, and little Annie. They ate every scrap he put before them and looked hopeful when he ladled out seconds. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. Catherine's jaw tightened. "Yesterday morning." Thomas said nothing, just cut more bread. When they'd finished, he noticed Annie's eyes drooping. The boys, too, were fighting sleep despite their obvious efforts to stay alert. "There's a bed in the other room," Thomas said. "It's yours for tonight, all of you." "We can't take your bed," Catherine protested. "You can and you will. I'll bunk out here by the fire. I've done it plenty of times before." She looked like she wanted to argue, but Annie chose that moment to sway on her feet. Catherine caught her, lifting the child into her arms. "Thank you," she whispered. Thank you." Thomas just nodded. He watched as she herded the boys into the bedroom, then busied himself banking the fire and laying out his bedroll. The storm still raged outside, but inside his small cabin, there was warmth and quiet. He was nearly asleep when he heard the bedroom door creak open. Catherine stood there, silhouetted by the dying firelight. "Mr. Brennan?" "Thomas," he corrected. "Just Thomas." "Thomas." She paused. "You asked who would find us. His name is Jake Thornton. He owns the Lazy J Ranch about 40 miles south. He'll come looking." Thomas sat up. He knew the name, knew the reputation. Thornton was a hard man who ran his spread with an iron fist and had connections throughout the territory. "Are you his wife?" he asked carefully. A bitter laugh escaped her. "No, I was." She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself. "It doesn't matter what I was. What matters is he considers us his property, bought and paid for, and he doesn't let go of what he thinks is his." The implications of her words settled over Thomas like a shroud. He'd heard stories, of course. Women who found themselves in impossible situations, children born into bondage of one kind or another. He'd just never expected it to show up barefoot and bleeding in his barn. "Well," he said finally, "Jake Thornton will have to go through me to get to you and those children. And I'm not an easy man to get through." Catherine studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded once and retreated to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Thomas lay back down but didn't sleep. Instead, he stared at the ceiling and listened to the storm, wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. Come morning, decisions would have to be made. But for tonight, there was a woman and 3 children sleeping safe and warm in his home, and that was enough. The wind howled around the cabin's corners, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Thomas reached over and checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded and within easy reach. Whatever came with the dawn, he'd be ready. The morning sun crept through the windows, painting golden squares on the rough wooden floor. Thomas had been awake since before dawn, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast as quietly as possible. He'd made coffee, thick and black the way he liked it, and set about making flapjacks, more than he'd cooked in years. The bedroom door opened slowly, and Catherine emerged, her hair hastily braided, Mary's blue dress looking less out of place in the morning light. She paused when she saw him, as if surprised to find him still there, still real. "Morning," Thomas said, not looking up from the griddle. "Coffee's hot," cups are on the shelf there." She moved cautiously to pour herself a cup, then stood holding it with both hands, the steam rising between them like a barrier. "The children are still sleeping," she said softly. "Let them rest. Lord knows they need it." He flipped a flapjack, pleased to see it golden brown. "How do you take your coffee?" "Black is fine." She took a sip, and he saw her shoulders relax fractionally. We should leave today. We've imposed enough." Thomas set down the spatula and turned to face her. In the morning light, he could see the exhaustion etched in every line of her face, the way she held herself like she might need to run at any moment. "Where would you go?" he asked simply. The question hung between them. Catherine's gaze dropped to her coffee cup. "I have a sister in California," she said finally. "San Francisco, if we could get to the railroad." "That's near 1,000 miles, Mrs. Mills, through rough country, with winter coming on." "I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "But we can't stay here. He'll—" "Mama?" Little Annie appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. The union suit Thomas had wrapped her in dragged on the floor behind her like a train. Catherine's entire demeanor changed. The fear and exhaustion vanished behind a gentle smile as she set down her coffee and opened her arms. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Annie nodded, burying her face in her mother's neck. Over the child's head, Catherine's eyes met Thomas's, and he saw the fierce protectiveness there, the mother wolf ready to fight for her cubs. "Who wants flapjacks?" Thomas asked, keeping his voice light. Annie peeked at him from her mother's shoulder, and he was rewarded with a tiny smile. Soon all three children were at the table, attacking the stack of flapjacks with enthusiasm. Thomas noticed how Catherine barely ate, instead watching the door and windows, her body tense as a drawn bowstring. "Mr. Brennan has horses." James, the older boy, announced through a mouthful of food. "I saw them through the window. Are you a real cowboy?" "I suppose I am," Thomas replied. "Would you like to meet them after breakfast, if your mother says it's all right?" The boy's eyes lit up, but he looked to Catherine first. She hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close to the house," she said, while the children explored the porch under Catherine's watchful eye. Thomas cleared the dishes. She'd retreated to the doorway, where she could see the children but also survey the horizon. He joined her, noting how she stiffened at his approach. "You mentioned Jake Thornton last night," he said quietly. "I've had dealings with him, bought a horse from him 2 years back. He's not a man who gives up easy." Catherine's knuckles whitened as she gripped the doorframe. "No, he's not. How long were you with him?" 4 years. The words came out flat, emotionless. "Since my husband died, I had debts. You see, the farm, the banknote. Jake offered to help. I was desperate, had 3 children to feed." She laughed bitterly. "I was a fool." Thomas said nothing, just waited. Sometimes silence drew out more truth than questions. He made it seem like employment at first, housekeeping, cooking for his men. But then, she trailed off, watching Annie chase a butterfly across the yard. The debts kept growing. Everything we ate, wore, slept under, all added to what I owed. And then he started talking about other ways I could pay. About Annie, when she gets older. About finding a buyer who might... She stopped abruptly, her breath coming fast. Thomas felt his jaw clench. "That's when you ran," he said. "In the middle of the night. No time to grab anything. I couldn't let him. Not my babies." Tears tracked down her cheeks, but she didn't seem to notice them. "We walked all night and most of yesterday. I remembered seeing your place when Jake brought me to town once. It seemed so far from his ranch. I thought maybe. You thought right, Thomas said firmly. You're safe here. She turned to look at him, then really look at him. Why? You don't know us. We're nothing to you but trouble. Thomas considered his words carefully. My Mary used to say that God puts people in our path for a reason. Maybe you needed shelter. Maybe I needed reminding that there's still good to be done in this world. He shrugged. Either way, you're here now, and I'm not a man who turns away folks in need. Before Catherine could respond, the sound of hoofbeats made them both freeze. A rider was coming up the trail, moving fast. Catherine grabbed for the children, but Thomas put a hand on her arm. Take them inside, he said calmly. Stay away from the windows. He stepped onto the porch as the rider came into view. Not Jake Thornton, but Sam Henderson from the neighboring ranch. Thomas relaxed fractionally but didn't lower his guard entirely. Morning, Sam, he called as the man reined in his horse. Thomas. Sam touched his hat brim. His eyes flicked to the cabin, curious. Just riding through, checking on stock after that storm. Lost any? None that I've found yet. Thomas kept his tone easy, but he positioned himself between Sam and the cabin door. Coffee's on if you want a light and sit. Thank you kindly, but I best keep moving. Sam gathered his reins, then paused. Funny thing, though. Ran into some fellows this morning asking if anyone had seen a woman and some kids. Said they'd run off from the Lazy J. Jake Thornton's offering a reward for information. Thomas's expression didn't change. That's so. Be $50, they said. That's a lot of money. Sam's eyes were keen on Thomas's face. Course, I told them I hadn't seen nothing. Storm like last night. Person would have to be desperate to be out in it. Desperate indeed, Thomas agreed. Sam nodded slowly. Well, I'll be heading on. You take care, Thomas. Storms like that can wash all sorts of things up on a man's doorstep. That they can, Sam, that they can. Thomas watched until Sam disappeared over the ridge, then went back inside. Catherine stood pressed against the wall. The children clustered around her. He knows, she whispered. Sam Henderson's a good man. He won't say anything. Thomas hoped he was right. But Jake will have men out looking. We need to be ready. We should leave now, before you bring more trouble to my door. Thomas shook his head. Mrs. Mills, Catherine, I knew what I was doing when I brought you in last night. I'm not changing my mind now. Young Robert tugged on his mother's skirt. Are we in trouble, Mama? Catherine smoothed his hair with a trembling hand. No, sweetheart. Everything's going to be fine. But over the boy's head, her eyes met Thomas's, and they both knew it was a lie. Jake Thornton would come, probably soon. The question was whether they'd be ready when he did. Thomas moved to the window, scanning the horizon. The morning had started peaceful enough, but he could feel storm clouds gathering again, this time of a different kind. Can you shoot? He asked Catherine quietly. She nodded. My husband taught me, but I haven't, not in years. Might be time to remember. He went to the cabinet where he kept his ammunition and pulled out a box of cartridges. Just in case. The children had gone quiet, sensing the shift in mood. Annie clung to her mother's skirts while the boys tried to look brave. Thomas's heart went out to them. No child should have to live in such fear. Why don't you young ones go look at those picture books on the shelf there? He suggested. Your mama and I need to talk about grown-up things. Once the children were settled with the books, though he noticed James kept glancing their way, Thomas spread out a rough map on the table. If you're set on California, there are ways to get there without going through town, he said. It's harder, but safer. I know some folks who might help. Good people who don't ask questions. Catherine studied the map, her finger tracing possible routes. We have no money, nothing to pay for passage or food. That can be worked out. Question is, do you want to run or make a stand? She looked up sharply. What do you mean? Jake Thornton's not the law. What he did, keeping you in bondage, threatening your children, that's not legal. Even out here. There's a federal marshal who comes through every few months. Judge, too. You think the law would side with me over Jake Thornton? Catherine's laugh was bitter. He owns half the territory. His word against mine. Maybe, maybe not. But running means looking over your shoulder forever. Catherine glanced at her children, then back at the map. I just want them safe. That's all that matters. Thomas nodded. He understood that kind of desperate love, though he'd never had the chance to feel it for children of his own. The day passed in tense preparation. Thomas showed Catherine where he kept the extra rifles, made sure she could load and aim. The children, sensing something but not understanding what, stayed close to their mother. They ate lunch in near silence, everyone listening for hoofbeats that didn't come. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, Thomas made a decision. I'm riding to town tomorrow. Talk to a few people, send some telegrams. You'll be safe here. I'll leave you armed and provisioned. No, Catherine grabbed his sleeve. If Jake's men are in town, then I'll be careful, but we need allies. Catherine, we can't do this alone. She released him slowly, reluctantly. I've put you in danger. This isn't your fight. It is now, Thomas said simply, and looking at her standing there in Mary's dress, with her children gathered around her like chicks around a hen, he realized he meant it. Somewhere between last night's storm and this morning's sunrise, their fight had become his fight. The question was whether they'd all survive it. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with frost glittering on the grass like scattered diamonds. Thomas was saddling Dusty when he heard the dogs, his old blue-tick hound, Moses, and the shepherd mix. Ruth set up a racket that meant strangers approaching. Catherine appeared in the doorway instantly, the rifle he'd left her clutched in white-knuckled hands. The children peered out from behind her skirts. Get back inside, Thomas said quietly, his hand moving to his holstered Colt. Bar the door and don't open it unless you hear me say it's safe. She nodded and disappeared. He heard the heavy bar drop into place. 3 riders came into view, moving at an easy walk. Thomas recognized the lead man immediately, Jake Thornton himself, sitting his black stallion like he owned the world. He was a big man, heavy through the shoulders, with iron-gray hair and a face that might have been handsome once before hard living and harder choices carved deep lines into it. The 2 men flanking him were typical hired guns, lean, watchful, with tied-down holsters and eyes that never stopped moving. Thomas stepped out from the barn, making sure they could see his hands were empty but near his gun. Morning, Jake. You're a long way from home. Thornton reined up just outside comfortable talking distance, making Thomas squint up at him against the morning sun, a deliberate choice. Thomas knew. Thomas Brennan. Thornton's voice was smooth as oil. Been a while? That bay gelding I sold you still serving you well? He is. Thomas kept his voice neutral. What brings you to my spread? Looking for some property of mine that went missing. Woman and 3 brats. They were seen heading this direction. Thornton's pale eyes never left Thomas's face. You haven't seen anything like that, have you? Can't say I have. The lie came easy. Storm 2 nights ago was fierce. Nobody with sense would be out in that. Nobody with sense would steal from me either, but here we are. Thornton shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. This woman, she's confused. Thomas, not right the head. Took off in the night with those kids, no food, no proper clothes. I'm worried about them." One of the hired guns snorted. Thornton silenced him with a look. "If she's your wife, I could understand the concern," Thomas said carefully. "Wife?" Thornton smiled, showing too many teeth. "No, not my wife. Let's call her an employee. In debt to me for considerable sum. 4 years of room and board for her and those brats adds up. Then there's the matter of her late husband's debts, which I took on out of Christian charity. Generous of you." "I thought so." Thornton leaned forward in his saddle. "Here's the thing. Brennan, I know Sam Henderson came by here yesterday, and I know Sam's got a soft spot for sob stories. So I'm thinking maybe, just maybe, this woman showed up here with some tale of woe, and you, being a decent man who's been alone too long, might have taken pity." Thomas said nothing, just waited. "I'll make it simple." Thornton continued. "That woman owes me near $800. Those children are collateral on that debt. I've got legal papers back at my ranch that prove it. Now, if she's here, you hand her over, and we'll call it square. If she's not here, but you happen to see her, you send word, and there's $50 in it for you. And if I don't see her," Thornton's smile vanished, "then I keep looking, and I'm thorough. Brennan, very thorough." The threat hung in the air between them. Thomas felt anger rise in his chest but kept it tamped down. "Well, I'll keep an eye out. But like I said, haven't seen anyone. Mind if we water our horses before we go? Maybe have a look around? Make sure this confused woman hasn't hidden herself in your barn without your knowing?" "I do mind, actually." Thomas let his hand drift closer to his gun. "My property. My rules. There's a stream a mile south if you need water." The two hired guns tensed, hands twitching toward their weapons. Thornton held up a hand to stop them. "Now, Thomas, no need for unfriendliness, that we're all civilized men here." "Civilized men respect property rights," Thomas replied. "Mine included." They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Thornton gathered his reins. "Have it your way. But Thomas, I'd hate for you to get tangled up in something that's not your concern. Man like you, living alone, working this spread by yourself, accidents happen, barns burn, cattle disappear. Would be a shame." "Yes," Thomas agreed, his voice hard as flint. "It would be a shame if anything like that happened. To anyone's property. Anywhere." Thornton's eyes narrowed at the implied counter-threat. "We'll be going. But this isn't over. That woman stole from me, and I always collect what's owed. Good day, Jake." Thomas watched them ride away, staying in place until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he walk to the cabin and rap on the door. "It's safe, it's me." The bar lifted and Catherine stood there, still clutching the rifle. Her face was pale but determined. "He knows I'm here," she said. "It wasn't a question. He suspects. But suspecting and knowing are different things." Thomas moved past her into the cabin, the children huddled by the fireplace, Annie crying quietly while her brothers tried to comfort her. "You heard?" he asked Catherine. "Every word." Her voice shook with fury. $800. He's counting every crust of bread, every threadbare dress, adding interest on top of interest. My husband owed him $80. 80. The rest is theft, plain and simple. The law might not see it that way, not without proof. Catherine sank into a chair, the rifle across her lap. "I have proof, or I did." She looked up at him. "My husband kept records, every payment, every transaction. Jake doesn't know I found them, hidden in an old Bible. But they're back at his ranch, in the quarters where we lived. Thomas felt a spark of hope. Those papers could make all the difference. A judge would have to listen. They're 40 miles away in the heart of Jake's territory. Might as well be on the moon. She stroked Annie's hair as the girl climbed into her lap. He'll be back, won't he? With more men. Probably. But not today. Jake's smart. He'll try legal pressure first. Sheriff owes him favors. He might try to get a warrant, claim you stole more than just yourself. What do we do? Thomas noted the we, but didn't comment on it. First, we make this place harder to attack. Then, I ride to town like planned, but not to send telegrams. I need to talk to Judge Carter. He's one of the few men in the territory Jake can't buy or bully. And if Jake comes while you're gone... Thomas went to the gun cabinet and pulled out another rifle. A box of shells. You fort up in here. This cabin's built solid. Logs are thick. Windows are high and narrow. One woman with a rifle could hold off a small army, at least for a while. Catherine stood, still holding Annie. I can't ask you to risk more. You're not asking. I'm offering. He met her eyes. This stopped being just about you the moment Jake Thornton threatened my property. Man's got to stand for something, or he's got no business calling himself a man. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Your wife was a fortunate woman. Thomas Brennan, he turned away, busying himself with checking his weapons. I was the fortunate one. The rest of the morning passed in preparation. Thomas showed Catherine the best positions for defense, where extra ammunition was stored, how to bar the shutters from inside. The boys, James and Robert, watched with serious faces, trying to be brave. Can we help, Mr. Brennan? James asked. I'm almost 9. I can shoot a rifle. Thomas crouched down to the boy's level. Your job is to help your mama and protect your sister. Can you do that? The boy nodded solemnly. Yes, sir. Good man. Thomas ruffled his hair, then caught Catherine watching with an unreadable expression. By noon, he was ready to leave. Catherine walked him to where Dusty stood saddled and waiting. Be careful, she said quietly. Jake has friends in town. So do I. Don't worry, I'll be back before dark. She surprised him by reaching out and touching his arm. Thomas, whatever happens, I want you to know we're grateful. I'm grateful. It's been so long since anyone showed us kindness without wanting something in return. He covered her hand with his just for a moment. Her fingers were calloused from hard work but gentle. Hold the fort, Catherine. We're going to get through this. As he mounted up, young Robert ran out with something in his hand. Mr. Brennan, you forgot this. It was his lucky silver dollar, the one Mary had given him on their wedding day. He must have left it on the table. You keep it safe for me, Thomas told the boy. I'll get it when I come back. Robert clutched the coin like a talisman, nodding seriously. Thomas took one last look at them. Catherine straight-backed in the doorway. Her children gathered around her, then touched his heels to Dusty's flanks. The cabin looked vulnerable in the afternoon light, but he knew appearances were deceiving. Catherine Mills had steel in her spine. She'd proven that by running through a storm with 3 children rather than let them be sold. Still, as he rode toward town, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving his heart behind, guarded by a woman he'd known for only 2 days but who'd somehow become worth fighting for. Behind him, he heard Moses howl, the old hound's way of saying goodbye. Or maybe, Thomas thought grimly, it was a warning. Either way, the die was cast. Jake Thornton had made his move. Now it was Thomas's turn. The trail to town stretched ahead, winding through stands of pine and open meadows. Somewhere out there, Thornton and his men were planning their next move. Thomas urged Dusty to a faster pace, Time was something they didn't have much of, and every minute counted. The evening had settled in quiet and peaceful. With the children fed and tucked into bed, Catherine sat by the fire, mending one of Robert's shirts by lamplight while Thomas cleaned his rifle at the table. It was a domestic scene that might have belonged to any frontier family, except for the loaded weapons within easy reach and the way both adults tensed at every sound from outside. "Tell me about your husband," Thomas said quietly, surprising himself with the question. Catherine's needle paused mid-stitch. "William was a good man, a dreamer, maybe, but good. He came west believing we could build something wonderful out here." A sad smile touched her lips. "He was right about the land, wrong about everything else." "How did he die?" "Fever, 3 winters ago. He held on for 2 weeks, fighting it." Her voice grew distant. "I sold everything we had for medicine, but it wasn't enough. After he died, I found out about the loan from Jake. William had borrowed to buy seed and supplies, planning to pay it back after harvest. But the drought that year, and Jake came collecting the day after the funeral." Bitterness crept into her tone. "So understanding, so sympathetic. He offered me work, a place to stay with the children. Said I could work off the debt. I was grateful, can you imagine? I actually thanked him." Thomas said nothing, just continued cleaning his rifle. He'd seen too many variations of the same story out here. "The first year wasn't so bad," Catherine continued. "Hard work, but fair. Or so I thought. Then Jake started showing me the ledgers. Every meal, every piece of clothing, the roof over our heads, all added to what I owed. The interest alone." She shook her head. "I realized I'd never be free. None of us would." "When did he start talking about the children?" Catherine's hands stilled completely. 6 months ago, a man came to dinner, a cattle buyer from back east. Fat, soft hands, looked at Annie like she was a prize calf. Her voice hardened. Jake mentioned how pretty she'd be in a few years. How some men prefer to raise their wives from young, train them proper. They laughed about it over brandy like it was nothing. Thomas felt his jaw clench but kept his voice steady. "That's when you started planning to run. I had to wait for the right moment. Jake started watching me closer after that dinner, like he knew what I was thinking. But 3 nights ago, he got drunk. Really drunk. Started talking about a man coming from San Antonio. Someone who'd pay good money for a boy Robert's age. Said he needed him unspoiled and trainable." Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "I couldn't wait any longer. I grabbed the children and ran." "You did right," Thomas said firmly. "Any parent would have done the same." "Would they?" Catherine wiped her eyes with fierce swipes. "For 4 years. I stayed. 4 years of my children growing up in that place, seeing things children shouldn't see, learning that people can be bought and sold like cattle. What kind of mother does that make me?" Thomas set down his rifle and moved to sit across from her. The kind who survived, the kind who kept her children fed and safe as long as she could, then risked everything to save them when it mattered most. She looked up at him, green eyes swimming with tears. "I used to be respectable, you know. William and I had a nice farm back in Missouri. I sang in the church choir. We had neighbors over for Sunday dinner." A broken laugh escaped her. "Now look at me, hiding in a stranger's house, waiting for men with guns to come take us back." "You're still respectable," Thomas said quietly. "More than respectable, and you're brave." Catherine stared at him for a long moment, then suddenly laughed, a real laugh this time, though tinged with disbelief. "Brave? I'm terrified every moment of every day. Being brave doesn't mean not feeling fear. It means doing what needs doing despite the fear. He gestured toward the bedroom where the children slept. They're safe tonight because of your courage. That's what matters. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the pop of the fire and the whisper of thread through fabric as Catherine resumed her sewing. Thomas found himself studying her in the firelight, the determined set of her jaw, the graceful efficiency of her movements, the way she kept one ear always attuned to the children's breathing in the next room. "What about you?" she asked suddenly. "You mentioned your wife, Mary?" Thomas nodded. "We were married 12 years, came out here together from Kentucky, built this place from nothing. She was—" He paused, searching for words. "She was sunshine, always laughing, always seeing the good in things. Even when times were hard, she'd find something to be grateful for." "No children?" "We tried. Lord knows we tried. Mary lost 3 before they could draw breath. The last one nearly took her with it." His voice roughened. Doc said no more. It broke her heart, but she made peace with it, said we had each other, and that was enough. "The fever?" "3 winters ago, same as your William, maybe the same outbreak. It took a lot of folks that year." Thomas stared into the fire. "I was in town when she fell ill. By the time I got back, she was burning up, held on for 5 days, talked nonsense most of it. But right at the end, she was clear as day. Told me not to close myself off, told me God would send someone who needed what I had to give." Catherine's needle stilled again. "And you think—" "I think Mary usually knew what she was talking about." He met her eyes. "I've been alone 3 years. Catherine. Got used to it, maybe even comfortable with it. Then you show up in my barn, half frozen and scared but still fighting, still protecting those children like a wildcat. Maybe Mary was right. Maybe you're here for a reason." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Catherine looked away first, color rising in her cheeks. "We should talk about tomorrow," she said, clearly changing the subject. "When Jake comes back—" Thomas accepted the shift. "He'll likely bring the sheriff, try to make it legal. Sheriff Dawson's in Jake's pocket, but he's also a coward. Won't want bloodshed if he can avoid it. And if Jake doesn't bother with legal, then we make it cost him. This cabin's defendable, and I've got friends who'll come if there's real trouble. Sam Henderson may have already spread word. There's no love lost between Jake and some of the other ranchers." Catherine finished her mending and folded the shirt carefully. "I keep thinking about those papers, the records William kept. If I had them, tell me exactly where they are." "In the bunkhouse where we lived, tucked inside an old Bible on the shelf above the bed. Jake never knew William could read and write so well. He kept that hidden. But every transaction, every payment, it's all there in William's hand." Thomas turned the information over in his mind. 40 miles to Jake's ranch, most of it open country. It would be near impossible to get in unseen. But— "What are you thinking?" Catherine asked, reading his expression. "I'm thinking Jake's here, focused on you. His ranch is probably running light on men right now." "Thomas, no. It's too dangerous." Maybe. Or maybe it's our best chance. With those papers and Judge Carter on our side, Jake loses his leverage. It becomes kidnapping, pure and simple." Catherine stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking?" He rose as well, moving to stand behind her. "But I need you to think hard. Is there anything else at that ranch that could help? Letters? Contracts? Anything?" She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "There's a strongbox in Jake's office. He keeps contracts there, not just mine. Other women, other families. He's built his empire on debt and desperation." "How do you know about it?" I cleaned his office. He'd sometimes forget I was there, talk business like I was furniture. She turned to face him. There are at least 3 other women in situations like mine. Maybe more on his other properties. Thomas felt a cold fury build in his chest. One woman and her children were tragedy enough, but a system of it, that changed things. Catherine, if I could get those papers, all of them, would you be willing to testify in court, in front of everyone? She lifted her chin. After what he threatened to do to my children, I'd testify in front of God himself. Good. Thomas moved back to the table, pulling out paper and starting to sketch a rough map. Tell me everything about the layout of Jake's ranch. Every building, every guard post, every routine you remember. They worked late into the night, Catherine's memory proving remarkably detailed. She knew guard schedules, when the hands ate meals, which dogs were chained and which roamed free. By the time they finished, Thomas had a clear picture of the Lazy J Ranch and a plan forming in his mind. You should sleep, he told her as the clock struck midnight. Tomorrow will be a long day. Catherine hesitated at the bedroom door. Thomas, what you're thinking of doing, it's not just dangerous. If Jake catches you on his property, he won't catch me. But if he does, then you take the children and run. There's money in a jar buried under the corner post of the porch, enough to get you to California. She crossed the room quickly, surprising him by taking both his hands in hers. Promise me you won't take foolish risks. Promise me you'll come back. Her hands were warm in his, and Thomas found himself acutely aware of how long it had been since anyone had touched him with genuine concern. I promise to be careful, he said, which wasn't quite the same thing. She seemed to understand the distinction but accepted it. Then I'll pray for your success. And Thomas, thank you for everything. After she'd gone to bed, Thomas sat alone by the dying fire, planning and thinking. Outside, an owl called in the darkness, and the wind whispered secrets through the pines. Somewhere out there, Jake Thornton was probably planning too, confident in his power and position. But Jake had made a mistake. He'd threatened children. He'd pushed a desperate woman too far. And he'd given Thomas Brennan a reason to fight. Come morning, the game would change. Thomas just hoped they'd all live to see how it ended. The sound came just after dawn. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving with purpose up the trail. Thomas was already positioned at the front window with his rifle, having been awake since before first light. Catherine emerged from the bedroom, fully dressed, her own rifle in hand. How many? She whispered. 3, maybe 4. Thomas checked his ammunition one more time. Keep the children back. If shooting starts, I know. Her face was pale but determined. The root cellar, like we discussed. The riders came into view, Jake Thornton leading, flanked by his 2 hired guns from yesterday, and Sheriff Dawson bringing up the rear. The sheriff looked uncomfortable, constantly shifting in his saddle. Thomas stepped onto the porch, rifle held casual but ready. Morning, Jake, Sheriff. Little early for social calls. Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat nervously. Now, Thomas, no need for the rifle. We're here on official business. That's so? Thomas kept his eyes on Jake. What kind of official business brings 4 armed men to my door? The sheriff pulled out a folded paper. Got a warrant here for the arrest of one Catherine Mills on charges of theft and breach of contract. We have information she might be on your property. A warrant? Thomas didn't move to take it. Signed by Judge Harlan, I suppose. That's right. The same Judge Harlan who owes Jake there close to $5,000 in gambling debts? The sheriff's face reddened. Now see here. No, you see here. Thomas's voice hardened. That piece of paper isn't worth the match it'd take to burn it, and you know it. Judge Carter's the only legitimate law in this part of the territory, and I don't see his signature. Jake spoke for the first time, his voice deceptively calm. Thomas, you're interfering with legal process. That's a serious offense. Is it? More serious than debt bondage? More serious than threatening to sell children? Thomas saw Jake's eyes narrow. Oh yes, I know all about your plans. Jake, amazing what people admit when they think nobody's listening. One of the hired guns, a lean man with dead eyes, spoke up. Boss, we're wasting time. Let's just... Shut up, Cole. Jake never took his eyes off Thomas. This is your last chance, Brennan. Stand aside. Let us search your property. And you walk away from this clean. And if I don't? Then you're harboring a fugitive. Sheriff Dawson here will have no choice but to arrest you too. Jake smiled coldly. Your choice. But either way, I'm leaving here with what's mine. Thomas heard movement behind him. Catherine had positioned herself at one of the windows. Good. She'd have a clear field of fire if needed. Here's the thing, Jake, Thomas said conversationally. You keep saying yours like people are property. Last I checked, we fought a war about that. Your side lost. Jake's face darkened. That woman owes me $800. To the law. The law says debt has to be proven in court. Real court. With a real judge. Thomas raised his voice slightly. Any of you boys know what happens to fake warrants? To sheriffs who enforce them? Federal marshals take a real dim view of that kind of thing. Sheriff Dawson shifted nervously. Now, Thomas, there's no need to bring federal law into this, isn't there? Thomas smiled grimly. Interstate commerce, sheriff, woman from Missouri, held against her will in Texas. That makes it federal jurisdiction. It was a bluff. Thomas wasn't entirely sure about the legal particulars, but he saw uncertainty flicker across Dawson's face. Jake, however, wasn't buying it. Enough talk. He turned to his men. Search the property. All of it. The hired guns started to dismount. Thomas worked the lever on his rifle, the sharp click cutting through the morning air. The first man sets foot on my land without permission gets a bullet. His voice was flat, matter of fact. Second man, too, if he's fool enough to try. You can't shoot all of us, Cole said, hand hovering near his pistol. No, Thomas agreed. But I can shoot two for certain, and I'm betting Miss Catherine in there can account for at least one more. Question is, which of you wants to die for Jake Thornton's money? The moment stretched taut. Thomas could feel sweat gathering between his shoulder blades but kept his expression calm. In his peripheral vision, he caught movement, riders approaching from the east. Sam Henderson appeared over the rise, accompanied by two other ranchers, Bob Martinez and old Jim Cooper. All three were armed. Morning, Thomas, Sam called out cheerfully. Saw these fellows heading your way, thought you might like some company. Jake's jaw tightened. The odds had just shifted dramatically. Sam, his voice was ice. This doesn't concern you. Well, now, that's where you're wrong. Sam rode up beside the sheriff, casual as could be. See, when armed men start riding around the valley with papers of questionable merit, it concerns all of us. What's next? You coming for my land because I owe you for a beer? Bob Martinez, a tough Mexican rancher who'd carved out his spread with blood and sweat, spoke up. We know about your games. Thornton, the debt traps, the women you keep like slaves. It ends now. You don't know what you're talking about, Jake snarled. Don't we? Old Jim Cooper, 70 if he was a day but still sharp as a tack, spit tobacco juice near Jake's horse. Boy, I've been in this valley since before you were born. I know exactly what kind of man you are. Sheriff Dawson was sweating profusely now. "Gentlemen, please, let's all calm down." "Sheriff," Thomas interrupted, "I think you should head back to town. Think real hard about whether you want to be part of what happens next." Dawson looked between Jake and the assembled ranchers, then at the cabin where another rifle barrel was just visible in the window. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "I need to verify this warrant with Judge Carter," he said finally. "Make sure everything's proper and legal-like." "Dawson," Jake's voice was sharp, "you work for me." "No, sir." The sheriff straightened slightly. "I work for the law. And these men are right. This needs doing proper." He turned his horse. "I'll be back when I have legitimate papers, if I can get them." He rode off without looking back, spurring his horse to a gallop once he was clear of the group. Jake watched him go, fury twisting his features. When he turned back to Thomas, his mask of civility had dropped entirely. "You've made a serious mistake, Brennan. All of you have." His gaze swept over the other ranchers. "I own more land, more cattle, more men than all of you combined. You want a war? I'll give you one." "No, Jake." Thomas's voice was quiet but carried clearly. "You'll ride away. You'll forget about Catherine Mills and her children. You'll tear up whatever fraudulent papers you've got. Because if you don't, if you push this, I'll make sure every dirty deal you've ever made comes to light." Jake laughed harshly. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Thomas smiled. "Funny thing about keeping detailed records of all your business arrangements. Works fine until someone gets hold of them." He saw the moment Jake understood. The color drained from the bigger man's face. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." Thomas's smile widened. "Oh, and Jake, you might want to hurry back. I hear there's been some trouble at your place. Something about a fire in one of the storage buildings. Probably nothing. But you know how these things can spread if not caught in time." It was another bluff. Thomas hadn't left the ranch, but Jake didn't know that. The man's face went from pale to purple. "If you've destroyed my property." "Like you threatened to destroy mine?" Thomas shrugged. "But I'm sure it's fine. After all, accidents happen, don't they? That's what you told me yesterday." For a moment, Thomas thought Jake might go for his gun despite the odds. The man's hand twitched toward his holster. But Cole, apparently smarter than he looked, put a restraining hand on his boss's arm. "Not here, Mr. Thornton, not now." Jake shook him off but backed down. "This isn't over, Brennan, not by a long shot." "Yes," Thomas said firmly. "It is. You come near this ranch again. You threaten that woman or those children again, and you'll answer for it. To me, to these men, and to the federal marshals I'll wire the moment you leave." Jake wheeled his horse around violently. "You'll regret this. All of you will regret this." He spurred his mount hard, Cole and the other hired gun following. They watched until the dust of their passage faded. Sam Henderson chuckled. "Well, that was interesting. You really got documents on Jake?" "Maybe." Thomas lowered his rifle at last. "Maybe not, but he believes I might, and that's what matters." "He'll be back," Bob Martinez said quietly. "Men like him don't give up easy." "I know." Thomas looked at his neighbors, men who'd ridden to help without being asked, simply because it was right. "Thank you. All of you." Old Jim waved him off. "Hell, boy, I've been waiting years for someone to stand up to that snake. Besides," he grinned, showing gaps in his teeth, "can't have excitement like this happening without me." The door opened and Catherine stepped out, still holding her rifle. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears as she looked at the assembled men. "Thank you," she said simply. "All of you, thank you." Sam touched his hat brim. "Ma'am, you just remember you've got friends in this valley now. Jake Thornton doesn't own everything, no matter what he thinks. The three ranchers took their leave, promising to spread word about what had happened. As they rode away, Catherine turned to Thomas. Do you really have documents? Not yet, he met her eyes, but I will tonight. Understanding dawned on her face. Thomas, no, not after this. He'll be expecting me to fort up here, waiting for his next move. Thomas headed for the barn. Last thing he'll expect is for me to ride straight into his territory. Catherine followed him. It's suicide. It's necessary. He began saddling Dusty. Those papers are the only thing that can end this for good. Otherwise, we'll be looking over our shoulders forever. She grabbed his arm. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You need someone who knows exactly where everything is and someone who can get in and out quickly. Her grip tightened. This is my fight, Thomas, my children's future. I have a right to be part of it. He looked down at her determined face. This woman who'd walked through a storm to save her children, who'd stood ready to fight against impossible odds. Catherine, we do this together, she said firmly. Or not at all. From the cabin doorway, James called out, Mama, is the bad man gone? Yes, sweetheart, she called back, not taking her eyes off Thomas. He's gone. For now. Thomas sighed, recognizing the steel in her voice. Mary had gotten that same tone when her mind was made up. We'll need someone to watch the children, he said finally. A small smile curved Catherine's lips. I think I know just the person. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as Catherine finished braiding Annie's hair. Mrs. Henderson, Sam's wife, sat in the rocking chair with her knitting, looking perfectly at home. She'd arrived within an hour of Catherine's message, bringing fresh bread and a no-nonsense attitude that brooked no argument. Don't you worry about these little ones, Martha Henderson said firmly. Raised 6 of my own, and they all survived to adulthood despite their best efforts otherwise. Thomas stood by the door, checking his weapons one final time. He'd traded his usual rancher's clothes for darker garments that would blend into the night. Catherine had done the same, wearing a pair of his old trousers and a dark shirt, her hair pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat. Remember, Thomas told the older woman, if we're not back by dawn, I take the children to Sam's place and send word to Judge Carter. Martha's eyes were shrewd. This isn't my first time dealing with trouble. Thomas Brennan. You just focus on what you need to do. Catherine knelt before her children, gathering them close. You mind Mrs. Henderson, understand? Mama will be back before you know it. Where are you going? Robert asked, his young face creased with worry. To fix things, Catherine said simply. To make sure we can stay together always. James, trying to be the man of the family, squared his shoulders. You'll be careful, very careful. She kissed each of them, lingering over Annie, who clung to her neck. Hey, Mama always comes back, she whispered to the little girl. Always. Thomas felt his throat tighten at the scene. These children had already lost one parent and lived in fear of losing another. The weight of responsibility settled heavier on his shoulders. Outside, he'd saddled both Dusty and his mare. Sage. The horses stood ready, their saddlebags packed with rope, water, and ammunition. As Catherine swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, Thomas noticed how natural she looked. This was a woman who'd grown up on horseback. They rode in silence at first, taking back trails Thomas knew from years of working the range. The sun dropped lower, painting the mountains crimson and gold. By the time they reached the boundary of Jake's land, purple twilight was settling over the valley. Thomas dismounted, ground-tying the horses in a grove of cottonwoods. We go on foot from here, quieter. Catherine nodded, checking the pistol he'd given her. The main house will be lit up, Jake always keeps lamps burning. He doesn't like the dark. But the bunkhouse where we lived is on the far side, past the corrals. They moved like shadows across the open ground, using every bit of cover available. Thomas's time hunting deer and elk served him well now, each footstep carefully placed to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. Behind him, Catherine moved just as quietly, her determination overcoming any fear. The Lazy J Ranch sprawled before them, a small empire built on others' misfortune. The main house blazed with light, and Thomas could hear voices and laughter from inside. Jake was apparently entertaining guests, which might work in their favor. There, Catherine whispered, pointing to a small building beyond the barn. That's where we lived. They circled wide, avoiding the areas where Thomas knew guards would be posted. His heart hammered as they slipped past the corral where several horses stood dozing. One lifted its head, ears pricked. But Catherine made a soft chirping sound and it settled again. The bunkhouse door was locked, but Thomas had expected that. He pulled out a thin piece of metal and worked it into the lock, a skill learned from a less reputable friend in his younger days. The lock clicked open. Inside, the space was cramped and mean. 2 narrow beds, a small table, a few shelves. It smelled of poverty and despair. Catherine moved immediately to the shelf above one of the beds, pulling down a worn Bible. Here, she breathed, opening it to reveal papers tucked between the pages. Williams records? Thomas scanned them quickly in the dim light filtering through the window. Names, dates, amounts, a clear record of usury and manipulation. This is good. This is what we need. The strongbox is in the main house, Catherine said. Jake's office, remember? Thomas had hoped to avoid the main house, but those other contracts could save more families than just Catherine's. He weighed the risk against the reward. Can you get us in without being seen? Catherine nodded. Servants' entrance through the kitchen. This time of night with guests. The cook will be busy in the dining room. They slipped back out, Thomas tucking the Bible inside his shirt. The main house loomed before them, light spilling from its windows like accusation. Music drifted on the night air. Someone was playing a piano badly. The kitchen door was unlocked, as Catherine had predicted. They eased inside, finding the room empty but filled with the debris of meal preparation. Catherine led the way, her hand in his as they navigated through hallways she knew by heart. Jake's office was at the back of the house, a shrine to his success. Mounted deer heads stared down with glassy eyes, and expensive furniture gleamed in the moonlight. The strongbox sat bold as brass on a shelf behind the desk. Thomas went to work on the lock while Catherine kept watch at the door. This one was newer, more complex, and sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked. Finally, mercifully, it clicked open. Inside were stacks of papers, each one a life destroyed or enslaved. Thomas grabbed them all, stuffing them into the sack he'd brought. As he did, one name caught his eye, Sarah Mitchell, aged 16, indentured for her father's debts. The date was recent, just 2 weeks ago. Thomas, Catherine whispered urgently, someone's coming. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, accompanied by Jake's distinctive laugh. Thomas closed the strongbox, spun the lock, and looked frantically for another exit. A window stood open to the cool night air. Go, he hissed, boosting Catherine up and through. He followed, landing hard in the flower bed below just as the office door opened. They heard Jake's roar of rage. He must have noticed something amiss. Shouts erupted from the house as they ran for the cottonwood grove where the horses waited. Oh, there, a voice behind them. By the corrals! A shot rang out, the bullet whining past Thomas's ear. He pushed Catherine ahead, turning to fire back, forcing their pursuers to take cover. More men were pouring from the bunkhouse now, alerted by the commotion. They reached the horses as another volley of shots split the night. Thomas practically threw Catherine into the saddle before mounting Dusty. They spurred hard, racing into the darkness as bullets whistled around them. "Hey, this way," Thomas shouted, veering off the main trail onto a deer path he knew. Behind them, he could hear pursuit forming, horses being saddled, dogs being loosed. They rode hard through the darkness, branches tearing at their clothes. Catherine stayed right with him, handling Sage with skill despite the treacherous terrain. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as their pursuers struggled to follow in the dark. After what felt like hours but was probably less than one, Thomas led them up a steep ravine to a hidden canyon he'd discovered years ago while hunting. They dismounted, leading the horses into a shallow cave screened by brush. Both of them were breathing hard, clothes torn, faces scratched by branches, but they were alive, and they had what they'd come for. "You're bleeding," Catherine said, touching his arm where a bullet had grazed him. "It's nothing." He was more concerned about her. She had a cut on her cheek and her hands were scraped raw. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, then suddenly laughed, a wild, exhilarated sound. "We did it. We actually did it." Thomas found himself grinning back. The danger wasn't over. Jake would be hunting them come daylight. But for now, they were safe, and they had the evidence that could destroy Jake's empire of debt. "Let me see that arm," Catherine insisted, producing a handkerchief from her pocket. As she tended the wound, Thomas watched her face in the moonlight. Somewhere between that first night in his barn and this moment in a hidden canyon, she'd become essential to him. The thought of her leaving for California once this was over sent an unexpected pang through his chest. "Catherine," he began, not sure what he wanted to say. She looked up at him, and something passed between them, an understanding, a possibility. Then she smiled, soft and warm. "Later," she said quietly. "When this is finished, when my children are safe, then we'll talk about things." Thomas nodded, understanding. First, they had to survive the night and get these documents to Judge Carter. But afterward, there might be time for new beginnings. They settled in to wait for dawn, sitting close together for warmth, the horses dozing nearby. In the distance, they could still hear occasional shouts as Jake's men searched. But here in their hidden sanctuary, with the evidence that would free not just Catherine but others like her, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere a night bird called. Catherine's head drooped onto his shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. Thomas kept watch, his rifle across his knees, guarding this brave woman who'd walked through storm and faced down her fears for her children. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. And with the papers tucked safely in his saddlebags, they finally had a fighting chance at justice. The moon hung cold and bright when the thunder of hooves shattered the ranch's peace. Thomas jerked awake from his doze by the fire, immediately alert. They'd made it back from Jake's ranch just after midnight, exhausted but triumphant, the stolen documents safely hidden. He'd sent Catherine to bed, insisting on keeping watch. Now, grabbing his rifle, he moved to the window. His blood ran cold at what he saw, at least 8 riders, spreading out to surround the cabin. Jake Thornton sat his black stallion in the center, and even in the moonlight, Thomas could see the fury radiating from him. "E. Brennan," Jake's voice cracked like a whip. "I know you're in there. You've got something that belongs to me." Catherine appeared beside Thomas, fully dressed, her own rifle ready. "How many?" 8, maybe 9. Thomas's mind raced. Get the children to the root cellar now. She didn't argue, disappearing into the bedroom. Thomas heard urgent whispers, the soft patter of bare feet. Good. At least the young ones would be safe underground. You've got 1 minute to come out, Jake shouted. After that, we're coming in and I won't be responsible for what happens. Thomas called back through the shuttered window. This is my property. Jake, you're trespassing. Again. You broke into my home, stole from my office. Jake's control was slipping. That's a hanging offense. Funny thing about stealing, Thomas replied, checking his ammunition. Can't steal evidence of crimes, that's called justice. A rifle shot answered him, splintering wood from the window frame. Then all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Windows shattered. Thomas dropped low, returning fire at muzzle flashes. In the back of the house, he heard Catherine's rifle speak. She'd taken position at the rear window, just as they'd planned. Burn them out! Jake's voice rose above the gunfire. Thomas's heart sank. Fire was every frontier dweller's nightmare. He saw torches being lit, men moving toward the barn. My horses, he muttered, but there was nothing he could do. If he left the window, they'd rush the house. Then, impossibly. He heard more gunfire, but not directed at the cabin. Shouts of confusion rose from Jake's men. In the chaos, Thomas saw riders charging from the east, Sam Henderson, Bob Martinez, and what looked like half the valley's ranchers. Thought you might need help. Sam's voice boomed across the yard. Martha sent word you'd gone visiting. Figured Jake wouldn't take that kindly. The battle shifted. Jake's men, caught between the cabin and the arriving reinforcements, began falling back. Thomas saw Cole, the hired gun, take a bullet in the shoulder and wheel his horse toward retreat. But Jake himself charged forward, spurring straight at the cabin, pistol in hand. The man's rage had overcome all sense. Thomas lined up his shot, but Catherine's rifle cracked first. Jake's hat flew off, and he jerked his horse around, blood streaming from a graze on his scalp. Murderers, Jake screamed. Thieves and murderers, all of you. More riders appeared, but these wore badges. Judge Carter himself, accompanied by 2 federal marshals, rode into the melee. That's enough, the judge's voice carried absolute authority. Everyone drop your weapons, now! The gunfire stuttered to a stop. Jake's men, seeing the federal badges, reluctantly complied. Jake himself sat swaying in his saddle, one hand pressed to his bleeding head. Judge Carter, he started, these people. Save it, Thornton. The judge's weathered face was stern. I've spent the last 6 hours reading some very interesting documents. Documents that paint you as a kidnapper, extortionist, and slave trader. Thomas emerged from the cabin, Catherine beside him. Her shot had been perfect, close enough to stop Jake without killing him. The man would live to face justice. He broke into my home, Jake protested, pointing at Thomas with a shaking finger, to retrieve evidence of your crimes. Judge Carter replied, evidence that corroborates testimony from multiple witnesses, including several women who've come forward since word spread about your business practices. One of the federal marshals, a tall man with steel-gray eyes, spoke up. Jake Thornton, you're under arrest for violation of federal anti-peonage laws, kidnapping, and conspiracy to traffic in persons. You can't. Jake's protest died as the marshal produced heavy iron shackles. Catherine stepped forward, her chin raised despite her torn clothes and disheveled appearance. 4 years, she said quietly. 4 years you held me and my children, threatened us, tried to sell us. Her voice grew stronger. It's over now. Jake's face contorted with rage. You were nothing, less than nothing. I gave you shelter, food. You gave me slavery. Catherine cut him off. But I'm free now. We're all free. As the marshals hauled Jake away, still cursing. Thomas noticed movement by the barn. His neighbors had formed a bucket brigade, dousing the flames before they could spread. His horses were safe. Judge Carter dismounted, approaching Thomas and Catherine. "Those documents are evidence now. You'll both need to testify at trial." "Gladly," Thomas said. The judge studied them both, a slight smile creasing his stern features. "You two make quite a team. Remind me not to get on your bad side." He tipped his hat to Catherine. "Ma'am, you've got courage. Your children are lucky to have you." As the judge remounted, Sam Henderson approached. "Looks like you could use some help with these windows come morning." "And that barn door," Bob Martinez added. "Bullets did a number on it." Thomas felt his throat tighten. These men, his neighbors, had ridden into gunfire for him, for Catherine and her children. Thank you. All of you." Old Jim Cooper spit tobacco juice and grinned. "Hell, son, best excitement we've had in years. Besides, about time someone took Jake Thornton down a peg, or 10. As the crowd dispersed, Jake's men hauled away by the marshals and the ranchers heading home. Thomas and Catherine stood alone in the bullet-scarred yard. The moon was setting now. Dawn not far off. "Is it really over?" Catherine asked softly. "The legal part, mostly there'll be a trial, but with those documents and testimony, Thomas shrugged. "Jake's going to prison for a long time." They heard movement from the house, Martha Henderson emerging with the children. Annie broke free, running to her mother. "Hey, Mama, there were loud noises, and Mrs. Henderson made us hide, but she said you were brave and—" "Shh, sweetheart." Catherine scooped up her daughter, holding her tight. "Everything's all right now." James and Robert followed more slowly, eyes wide as they took in the damage to the ranch. "Was there a battle?" Robert asked in awe. "Something like that," Thomas said, "but the good guys won." Martha Henderson bustled about, sking at the state of things. "You all need food and rest. I'll start breakfast. And don't argue. You look dead on your feet, both of you." As the older woman took charge, Thomas found himself watching Catherine with her children. She was explaining what had happened in simple terms, assuring them they were safe now, that the bad man couldn't hurt them anymore. Annie looked up at Thomas with those bright blue eyes. "Did you protect us, Mr. Thomas?" "We protected each other," he said, ruffling her hair. "That's what families do." The words slipped out without thought, but he saw Catherine's quick glance, the color that rose in her cheeks. Later, after Martha's hearty breakfast and the children had been put down for naps, Thomas and Catherine found themselves alone on the porch. The morning sun revealed the full extent of the damage: broken windows, splintered wood, bullet holes everywhere. "You're home," Catherine said sadly. "I brought this destruction to your home." "It's just wood and glass," Thomas replied. "It can be fixed. What you brought was life, Catherine. This place had been just a house for 3 years. Last few days, with you and the children here, it felt like a home again." She turned to face him fully. "Thomas, I need to say something, and when I came here, I was running, desperate. I never expected—" She paused, searching for words. "I never expected to find someone who'd stand with us, fight for us. You could have turned us away, could have stepped aside when Jake came calling. Instead, you risked everything. It was the right thing to do. It was more than that." She stepped closer. "When this is over, the trial and all, I was planning to go to California and to my sister." Thomas's heart sank, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's sensible, fresh start for you and the children." "Or," Catherine continued, her eyes never leaving his, "we could have a fresh start here, if you'd want that." Hope bloomed in Thomas's chest. "Catherine Mills, are you asking to stay?" A smile curved her lips. I'm asking if you'd want a ready-made family. 3 children who already adore you, and a woman who... She took a breath. A woman who's fallen in love with the man who gave her back her freedom. Thomas pulled her close, feeling her fit perfectly against him. I think Mary would approve, he said softly. She always said this place needed children's laughter. Catherine's arms went around his neck. Then I suppose we're staying. Their kiss was interrupted by delighted squeals. The children had apparently not been napping after all. They came tumbling onto the porch, Annie attaching herself to Thomas's leg while the boys danced around them. Does this mean we can stay? James asked hopefully. Forever? Thomas looked down at them, these children who'd walked through fear and come out the other side still able to hope, still able to trust. Then he looked at Catherine, this remarkable woman who'd fought for them with everything she had. Yes, he said firmly, this is your home now, our home. As the sun climbed higher, warming the bullet-scarred ranch, Thomas felt the last of his long loneliness melt away. They had battles still ahead, the trial, rebuilding, making a life together. But they'd face them as a family. And that, he thought as Annie climbed into his arms and Catherine leaned against his side, was worth fighting for. 6 months had passed since that night of gunfire and justice. The morning sun painted the ranch in shades of gold and green, a gentler light than the harsh glare of summer. Thomas stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the transformation that had taken place. The bullet holes were gone, covered by fresh boards that neighbors had helped install. New glass gleamed in the windows, but more than the physical repairs, it was the life that filled the place that marked the real change. Chickens pecked in the yard where Annie scattered feed, her delighted laughter ringing out when they flocked around her feet. By the corral, James was helping muck out stalls, trying to match Thomas's efficiency with the pitchfork. Robert sat on the fence, sketching the horses in a notebook. The boy had shown a real talent for drawing. Breakfast is ready, Catherine called from the doorway, and Thomas turned to smile at her. She wore a simple calico dress, her hair pinned up, flour dusting her hands, beautiful in her everyday contentment. They gathered around the table, a new one, larger than the old, built to accommodate a family. Grace was said, hands joined in a circle, Annie's small fingers warm in Thomas's rough palm. These morning meals had become precious to him, filled with chatter about the day's plans, the children's lessons, the small dramas of ranch life. Mr. Sam said he'd bring by that new colt this afternoon, James announced through a mouthful of biscuit. The paint with the white face. Don't talk with your mouth full, Catherine corrected gently. And yes, we'll look at the colt, but no promises. We need to be practical about taking on more animals. Thomas hid his smile behind his coffee cup. He'd already decided to buy the colt for James's birthday next month, had been setting money aside. The boy had proven himself responsible with the animals, gentle and patient. After breakfast, the children scattered to their chores and lessons. Catherine had insisted on continuing their education, and Thomas had cleared out a corner of the main room for a proper study area. He'd even ordered books from Denver, readers, arithmetic primers, maps of the world. The trial documents came yesterday, Catherine said quietly once they were alone. Jake was sentenced to 15 years hard labor. Thomas nodded. They'd both testified at the trial 2 months ago, along with 3 other women Jake had held in bondage. The federal judge had been thorough and unsympathetic to Jake's protests of legitimate business practices. It's finished then, he said. Yes. Catherine moved to stand beside him at the window. Sarah Mitchell was there, the girl whose contract we found. She's free now, working for the Martinezes. She asked me to thank you again. You're the one who was brave enough to run, to fight back. Catherine slipped her hand into his. We fought together. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Robert show Annie how to properly hold a paintbrush. He'd been working on a portrait of the family, his gift, he said, for the wedding next month. Thomas still felt a flutter of anticipation when he thought about it. They'd waited, wanting to be sure the children were settled, that this new life was solid beneath their feet. I was thinking, Catherine said, about adding a room to the house, for when the baby comes. Thomas nearly dropped his coffee cup. He turned to stare at her, seeing the mix of joy and uncertainty in her eyes. A baby? And come winter, the doctor thinks. She bit her lip. I wasn't sure how you'd... He set down the cup and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in a spinning embrace that made her laugh. How I'd feel. Catherine, He set her down gently, cupping her face in his hands. I thought I'd never have this chance. To be a father. You already are, she said softly. To 3 children who adore you, who've started calling you Papa when they think I'm not listening. Thomas felt his eyes burn. He'd noticed it too, the gradual shift from Mr. Thomas to Papa Tom and finally just Papa. Each time sent warmth through his chest. And now one more, he said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our child, she agreed, covering his hand with hers. The morning continued with its familiar rhythms. Thomas worked on repairing a section of fence while Robert helped, the boy eager to learn everything about ranching. James rode out to check the cattle in the north pasture, proud of the responsibility. Annie helped Catherine with the washing, which mostly meant playing in the soap bubbles. After lunch, Sam Henderson arrived with the paint colt, just as promised. The animal was a beauty, strong lines, intelligent eyes, gentle temperament. Thomas watched James approach the colt with the patience he'd been taught, letting the animal get used to his scent before attempting to touch. "He boys got away with horses," Sam observed. "Natural-born rancher." "He's a good kid," Thomas agreed. "All of them are." Sam chuckled. "Catherine's done wonders for you, Thomas. Haven't seen you this happy since, well, in a long time." It was true. The loneliness that had wrapped around him like a shroud for 3 years had vanished, replaced by purpose and joy. Even the memories of Mary had transformed from sources of pain to gentle reminders of love's resilience. That evening, after supper and chores, they gathered in the main room. Catherine worked on sewing tiny clothes while Thomas whittled a toy horse for Annie. The boys played checkers by the fire, arguing good-naturedly about the rules. It was a scene of such domestic peace that Thomas had to pause and simply absorb it. "Tell us again about the night Mama came," Annie requested, climbing into Thomas's lap with her rag doll. It had become a favorite story, told and retold with small embellishments each time. Thomas settled her comfortably and began. "It was the darkest night I'd ever seen, and the storm was howling like 100 wolves. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they knew every word." Catherine smiled from her sewing, occasionally adding her own details. The story had transformed from a night of desperation to an adventure tale. Fear replaced by triumph. And then Papa Tom said, "You're safe now." Annie finished, snuggling against his chest. "And we were..." "Yes," Thomas agreed, pressing a kiss to her blonde curls. "You were safe. You all were." Later, after the children were in bed, Thomas and Catherine sat on the porch watching the stars. The night was mild, spring fully transformed into early summer. From somewhere in the distance came the call of a coyote, answered by another. Do you ever think about how different life might have been? Catherine asked. If I'd run to a different ranch that night? I try not to, Thomas admitted. Can't imagine this place without you all in it now. Can't imagine my life without you. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. I was so scared that night, not just of Jake, but of the unknown. I didn't know if I was running towards something better or just different danger. What made you trust me? Catherine was quiet for a moment. Your eyes, she said finally. When you found us in the barn, you looked at us and saw people in need, not problems or property. And when you gave me your coat, such a simple thing. But Jake would never have given up his own comfort for another. Thomas remembered that moment. Catherine shivering in the lantern light, trying to shield her children even as she froze. The coat had been automatic, unthinking, basic human decency. I'm glad you ran to my barn, he said simply. So am I. She tilted her face up to his. So am I. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. A woman in traveling clothes rode up to the ranch, escorted by one of Sam Henderson's hands. She was perhaps 40, with Catherine's same dark hair and green eyes. Margaret, Catherine gasped from the porch. How did you— Your letter finally reached me, the woman said, dismounting. I came as fast as I could. I had to see for myself that you were truly safe. The sisters embraced tearfully while Thomas hung back, giving them space. This was the sister in California, the one Catherine had planned to flee to. He felt a flutter of old fear. Would Catherine still want to go west now that contact was re-established? But Catherine turned to him, drawing him forward. Margaret, this is Thomas, my fiancé. Margaret studied him with sharp eyes. So you're the man who saved my sister and her children. They saved themselves, Thomas said. I just offered shelter. He's being modest, Catherine said. He stood against Jake Thornton and his men, risked everything for us. Margaret's expression softened. Then I owe you more than I can say. She looked around the ranch, taking in the peaceful scene, the children who had noticed the visitor and were approaching shyly. This is a good place, a healing place. She stayed for 3 days, getting to know the children again, sharing stories of California, catching up on 4 years of separation. Thomas worried at first about the visit's impact, but Margaret seemed genuinely happy for her sister's new life. On her last evening, Margaret sought out Thomas privately. I came here planning to convince Catherine to return with me, she admitted. I have a good situation in San Francisco, could provide for them. Thomas's heart clenched, but he kept his expression neutral. It's her choice, always has been. Yes, it is, Margaret smiled, and she's chosen well. You love her? With everything I have. And the children? In their mind now, in every way that matters. And there'll be another come winter. Margaret's eyes widened, then filled with tears. She didn't tell me. But then, that's Catherine, always holding the important things close until she's sure. She placed a hand on Thomas's arm. Take care of them. All of them. Always. The next morning, Margaret departed with promises to visit again and invitations for them to come to California someday. Catherine stood watching until her sister's figure disappeared over the rise. Any regrets? Thomas asked softly. No. Catherine turned into his arms. This is home now. You are home. As if to punctuate her words. Annie came running, chasing a butterfly, while the boys argued about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Normal, everyday chaos that filled the ranch with life. Thomas looked out over his land, their land now, and saw not just grass and cattle and fences, but a future stretching bright before them. There would be challenges, certainly. Ranch life was never easy, but they'd face them together. This family forged from desperation and tempered by courage. "Papa Tom," Annie called, "come see, the barn cat had kittens." He and Catherine exchanged amused glances, more mouths to feed, but the children would be thrilled. Hand in hand, they walked toward the barn and whatever small adventure awaited. Behind them, the house stood solid and welcoming, no longer bearing scars of violence but showing signs of life. Laundry on the line, toys on the porch, smoke rising peacefully from the chimney. It was a scene Thomas couldn't have imagined that stormy night months ago when desperate strangers sought shelter in his barn. Sometimes, he thought, the best things in life arrived unexpectedly, carried on the wings of storms. You just had to be brave enough to open your door when they knocked. Or in this case, brave enough to offer your coat to a shivering woman and her 3 children, and see where kindness might lead.